let's get started since we're right on time here. Um, and excited to dive in today. Like I said, I'm Dr. Ryan Meyers. I am coming to you today. Looks like we had one or two others. I'm coming to you today from Hawaii. But typically, I'm from Utah. So I own and operate two different clinics in Utah. We do pain, injury, and rehab. And I run a functional medicine clinic where I handle chronic illnesses, and we work with therapies such as ozone, hyperbarics, and a lot of those which we'll be diving into today in response to biofilm. So let me let's share the screen here and we will get going. So kind of the way this works is today we're gonna talk. If you have questions, please put those in the chat. We'll have time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. This is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube and sent out to those of you who registered. So if you can only make part of it or you want to go back and relook, this will be available to all of you. So let's dive in here and let's go. So, all right. So first of all, let's see here. Okay, so first of all, we'll make sure everybody can see what's going on here, and then we'll go from there. So today we are talking about biofilm. So entitled today's course, Breaking Through the Barrier, because if you're familiar with biofilm, biofilm is this barrier. So today it's understanding biofilm and the role of how ozone and other therapies can help to defeat biofilm. As a lot of you know, we probably have a mix here of clinicians as well as home users of ozone or other therapies. And so today we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive than high level, but we're not going so in the science of every clinician. Those are things we could spend literally a weekend on, but enough that we can all understand how this nasty thing called biofilm works, why it's so hard for conventional and even traditional or functional medicine or alternative therapies to treat, which is, we'll talk about why stacking approaches are really one of the best ways to attack biofilm, and really in particular the role of ozone therapy in this, and some other things. So so we kind of just went through this, right? So the objectives for today: what are biofilms? Where do they form? Why they're so hard to treat? And then a high level and starting to get an introduction into why or what the mechanisms of ozone are and why they work in disrupting biofilm, and as well as touching on the clinical applications of what this means and why this is important. So as we go here, so what are biofilm? So I always love starting with patient speak. And what I mean by that as a clinician, what I love about that is we have all this knowledge and have all this science, but I've got to explain this to someone who has never heard these terms before, or maybe has heard them, but they've been misconstrued. So when I tell somebody what biofilm is, I'm like, it's like the force field that a bacteria and other things make around themselves so that they're harder to kill. That's the easiest way to think about it. They're structured communities of microorganisms that are made or encased, I love that word, by what we call EPS, which is extracellular polymeric substance. And so the biofilm or the bacteria creates this, and it starts to grow around it to protect so that it's harder to beat. It's composed of a number of different things, but again, I call this the force field or the shield around what's going on. Okay, hold on. Looks like my head is blocking what's happening here. Let's change that. Is that better, everybody? How about now? Okay, perfect. So, okay, now that we've handled that, okay, so let's keep going with biofilms. So how do biofilms form? There's basically 5 stages of biofilm formation. So first of all, we get these planktonic bacteria that attach to the surface of something. But biofilm doesn't just exist in the body, it can exist outside. So basically we have this bacteria that attaches to some type of surface. And then it starts to form what's called ECM, or this extracellular matrix, that starts to produce these microcolonies, and that forms the EPS. So that's that layer that we just talked about. And you can see in the picture number 3 over here, we start to form that force field around the bacteria. And then in phase 4, we get mature development. So really it just reinforces. So we've got these layers or different levels of strength of biofilm, really just reinforces its defense mechanisms, and how that works. Then finally, level 5 or phase 5, we get what's called the dispersal phase, where this is where the biofilm actually let little pieces of bacteria out so that they can go form new attachments, new biofilms. And as we'll talk about, then they start to form this communication between one another, that the biofilm actually enables this communication so that they can talk together, they can grow together, and they can enhance their defense mechanisms. And so this process starts and then it just becomes cyclical. And so we get this mature biofilm that's spreading and then creating more biofilms, so that this becomes extremely hard to treat. Okay, where do they exist? So again, they can attach anywhere that has a surface. In the body, though, these are some of the places that we see them the most. And often, some of these we talk about all the time. Some of these are fairly new concepts, but oral cavity. So yeah, in our teeth, in our gums, dental plaque, periodontal disease, gastrointestinal tract. So H. pylori is a very common bacteria that we know it exhibits biofilms. The urogenital system. So know anybody or working with patients that have these chronic UTIs that don't seem to go away, we have to consider biofilm. Lungs, so respiratory infections, especially the chronic ones. I remember I had a patient a few years ago came to me and said, man, I've just had this upper respiratory infection and I'm on like my 6th round of antibiotics. And I was like, holy cow, maybe after like the 2nd or the 3rd, do they realize that the antibiotics aren't going to kill it and it's something else? And we have to consider this. This is the type of thing that we're talking about. Chronic sinus infections, and Marcons, I'll touch on this a little bit. Marcons is a antibiotic resistant form of staph that lives high up in our nose and our sinus cavities, especially in conditions such as biotoxin illness like SIRS. And then this is a big one, and I saw someone mention this early on, but implants and medical devices. So catheter, anything that we put in our body, catheters, pacemakers, prosthetics, metal implants in joints, breast augmentation tissue, anything that's foreign to the body is going to attract these attachments and this biofilm generation. So we've got all these places. There's definitely more. These are probably more of the most common ones that we talk about, we see, and that we see drive illness. One of the things, if you're on webinars with me, you'll learn I'm very particular about really, okay, all this stuff's cool, but what's driving illness? What's driving symptoms? What's driving root cause? How can we identify that? And then how can we apply treatments or therapies such as ozone and others to really help get the patient better? All this information is amazing, but if we don't know how to leverage it and use it to get a patient better, then it's just information. So today, hopefully there's some things we can talk about to take this so that you can go home to yourselves, to your patients if you're working with them, and we can go through there. So common conditions associated with biofilms. Again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is what I would call your common conditions. So infectious diseases, Lyme, we know the bacteria that is associated with Lyme and its co-infections can have biofilms associated with it. Chronic inflammatory issues, autoimmune diseases, 100% can be dealing with biofilm, which is part of why it's so hard to work with. Neurological disorders. So this is an interesting one that this webinar is not for, but we could dive into this. But there are links to Alzheimer's from oral biofilms from gingivitis, plaque disease, and periodontal illness. SIRS. So I'm one of the few doctors in the country that's certified to truly work and diagnose with SIRS, which is secondary to biotoxin illness in a person who has a genetic predisposition to not be able to identify and eliminate that biotoxin illness. So a lot of this is secondary to mold. But again, Marcons, which I mentioned, which lives high up in our sinuses, is present in about 80% of SIRS patients and causes a ton of inflammatory storms, including brain fog and neurocognitive deficits. Metabolic disorders. So yes, this talks about diabetes-related wounds, but there's others. Anywhere that we can have these things really attaching and working is where we're going to have a problem. So why are they so hard to treat? So first of all, that barrier that they create is a literal physical barrier, and it fights against antibiotics. You do some research into biofilm, and biofilms have become stronger over the years as our usage of antibiotics have gone up. So biofilm is part of the bacteria's response to antibiotics and becoming antibiotic resistant. And so this physical barrier protects it against antibiotics. It also protects it against the body's natural immune response. So the immune response to fight bacteria and the other things that can grow inside of a biofilm, the barrier protects. So that's one of the main reasons is a lot of the conventional tools to treat and kill, including our body's own, can't get through this barrier. This low metabolic activity or this dormant cells is an interesting concept because a lot of the medications, a lot of therapies we use go after high metabolic cells, and these ones are not. So it's almost like it's a low signal that treatments can't get to. Quorum sensing, I mentioned this, we'll talk about it again. This is biofilm actually creates this communication network between the bacterias so that they can communicate, they can spread, they can grow, they can do all of those types of things. All right, traditional and antibiotics often kill free-floating bacteria, but not the biofilm. So again, if it's inside the biofilm, then it's hard for those to get to. And the antibiotics that we're giving people just drive or kill the bacteria that's floating out there that has not formed this yet. Okay. So we've talked about this a little bit. Standard medicine, antibiotics are often ineffective, leading to recurrence. People will use antifungals and antivirals because those can also have limited penetration into the biotoxin. Enzyme therapy is interesting. It's used to help degrade the biofilm matrix, but it doesn't help get it all the way, and it won't kill what's inside. So this is where this combination therapy of using standard medicine with supportive therapies such as ozone, HBOT, different supplements. This is where I'm always a big fan of a stacked combination therapy. I call it the functional medicine art for the person that's in front of us, because this is where we have to say and understand the diagnosis, where this is going on, what's preventing it, and what tools do I have in my belt that address the individual in front of us. So what is ozone? And again, a lot of you have probably been connected to ozone or understand it. So we're going to do some high level for a review, or for those this is new for. But ozone is different than oxygen. Chemically, oxygen is O2 and ozone is O3. And so it is a highly reactive molecule, and it does have antimicrobial properties. But in regards to the conversations that we're having today, it does break down biofilms, and we're going to dive deep into that. It does increase oxygen delivery, and it stimulates the body's natural immune response. And so what are the ways that you can, the forms of ozone therapy that can be delivered? There's several, to be honest. The most common that exists out there is IV, which we commonly call major autohemotherapy, which is a very specific form of ozone IV. And there's different dosages and ranges and therapy protocols within that. Again, that's the art and the clinical aptitude for the person in front of you. And then insufflation. And so this can be done anywhere. So most commonly rectally or vaginally. We will often do ear insufflation as well as sinus insufflation. Topical, there's ozonated oils, there's ozone saunas, there's all sorts of places where you can, or therapies or means or delivery systems for ozone. So what are its key mechanisms? So this, again, if we're looking at, if I could say, what are the main 5 or 6 things that ozone does? Huge, huge, huge is mitochondrial support, because it's improving oxygen utilization. So this helps to produce ATP and energy production at a cellular level, as well as at a whole body level. Circulatory support. So we're improving circulation, better blood flow, increased nutrient delivery, and we can actually accelerate tissue healing through that. It definitely helps modulate the immune system. I love the term modulate, because if we are dealing with an overactive immune system, we don't want to enhance our immune system. We want to bring it down. If we're dealing with immune suppressed, we don't want to bring down the immune system. We want to bring it up. So ozone actually acts as this amazing modulator that brings the immune system right back to the middle ground, so that we're able to do what we need it to do. Oxidative preconditioning, that's an interesting term, but really it helps produce antioxidant defenses and enhances their ability to create cellular protection. We mentioned antimicrobial, so ozone is extremely effective against fighting fungi, bacteria, and viruses, which is very unique that this one molecule can do all of those things, sometimes way more effectively than anything that traditional medicine can give us. And then detoxification enhances liver and cellular detox pathways. So it's crazy when I tell my patients, like, look, we're going to use ozone. We can talk about all this, but again, patient speak. I'm like, look, ozone is one of the most amazing firefighters to help fight and put out fiery forest fires of inflammation in your body, but it is also the best cleanup and repair that comes in to build up after the mess, to help the body heal, grow, and be healthy again. So what are its mechanisms against biofilms? So now taking those, what's really specific to the things that we've learned about biofilm today? So first of all, oxidative stress breaks down the extracellular polymeric substance. So this EPS that makes the force field around the bacteria, that the oxidative stress, or sometimes we call it a hormetic effect, a purposeful stress causing effect that the ozone creates, breaks down that barrier. So now as we start to break down that barrier, we can expose the bacteria that's in there. This is a fascinating one. It actually inhibits quorum sensing. We'll dive into this. So they can't communicate. It has that antimicrobial effect. So once that EPS is gone, we can destroy what's inside. And it enhances the body's natural immune system to fight once the force field is gone. And then we can improve the tissue healing and from what has been damaged because of the illness that's been taking place. So diving in a little bit deeper here. So oxidative stress disrupts biofilm integrity. So what does this mean? So when ozone comes in contact with the biofilm, one of the things we know ozone does is it generates what's called reactive oxygen species, or ROSs. I just had a thought for those of you out there that are Princess Bride fans. We introduced this to our kids. Those are ROUSs, rodents of unusual size. Probably never have heard this brought up in a ozone webinar, but you did today. But no, biofilm helps generate reactive oxygen species. And these compounds break down that EPS that protects the bacterial colonies. And so first of all, we know we've got to kill the stuff inside, but if we can't break down these layers of biofilm, doesn't matter how much good we have to break down the stuff inside. So you can see we've got multiple different types of ROSs that are created by ozone. When it comes in contact with that and then starts to deteriorate or break down that EPS force field. So now treatment, the body's immune system, and other things can start killing what's inside of that. This inhibiting quorum sensing, to me, I find this to be one of the most fascinating things that ozone does. And here's a better definition of quorum sensing. It's the process by which bacteria communicate to coordinate growth, resistance, and virulence inside the biofilms. I think this is crazy that what biofilms do, they actually create this communication structure that allows them to coordinate growth so it gets bigger and worse. It enhances the resistance, so all the force fields get stronger, and it enhances how bad the bacteria or the pathogen inside the biofilm is to actually help create worse illness. So this quorum sensing is a pretty bad deal, but it's fascinating that the biofilm helps to create this. So what ozone does to do this is it oxidizes those signaling molecules that quorum sensing uses to communicate. And so we get that reduction in bacterial coordination. So now the biofilm formation decreases, and we decrease or weaken the defense mechanisms, making them easier to eradicate. So this ozone, when it comes in and oxidizes these molecules, we prevent and stop this coordinated growth, this resistance, and the virulence inside. So direct microbial effects, we talked about this, but again, and we know this, whether it's in our bodies, ozone's used as a cleaner for structures and homes and buildings because of how good it is at killing bacteria, virus, and funguses. But it does that through cell lysis. So it actually breaks down the walls and the cell membranes of the cells. It stops the enzymatic activity. So it stops the growth, and it stops the part of these bacterial that causes the issue. And then this denaturation of viruses. Viruses, we know, are extremely hard for conventional medicine to deal with. And this is where ozone is amazing. We use ozone clinically all the time, whether we're dealing with acute and or chronic viral exposure, because of how well it fights and kills this virus issue. And so ozone is effective also against things that are antibiotic resistant. We talked about Marcons, MRSAs on the list, Pseudomonas, other fungus that can be really hard to fight and kill, as well as other pathogens. So ozone, once we get the shield off, ozone comes in and helps to kill and break down and get rid of the bad guys inside of the force field. So we talked about this, enhances or modulates the immune function, but as we talked about, biofilms often, they keep the body's natural immune system out. And as it grows and proliferates and this bacteria and other organisms proliferate, the immune system starts to take a hit. And so that's where we have these chronic illness issues where the acute inflammation is turned into a chronic inflammation, the immune system gets disrupted, and now it can't work the way that it's supposed to. And now we have force fields preventing it from doing its job anyway. So by ozone taking rid of and breaking down the force field we call biofilm, and then modulating the immune system to say, no, now we're going to help produce and enhance macrophages and neutrophils to come in and do their job. We're going to promote the positive cytokine release, and we're going to help activate these antioxidant pathways so that we can reduce this chronic inflammation. We can fight what's going on and let our immune system do its job naturally. It's one of my favorite things about ozone is that it helps to activate the body's natural responses so that the body can do what it needs to do naturally. Increases oxygenation, improves tissue healing. We mentioned this with regards to mitochondrial function and ATP production. But biofilm bacteria, we know this, infections like to live in a hypoxic environment, and especially chronic infection. And so if we can oxygenate the environment, and we'll talk about this again in a minute, then we can help to produce the body's natural healing responses and kill the bad guys. I also love that ozone stimulates nitric oxide or NO production, because that's how we help increase this microcirculation. So now we're getting better blood flow into diseased tissue, into places where we can't get nutrients, so you can fight and kill and fight and kill. So as an overview, again, oxidative stress positively initially breaks down that EPS biofilm force field. We stop the communication so that they can't grow, they can't get worse. Then we go in and fight and kill. Ozone helps to destroy these pathogens. It helps the body's natural immune response to fight and then heal. And then we increase oxygenation so that we can heal whatever injury or damage has happened from these pathogens. So I want to talk a minute about stacking therapies. And again, we could do a whole weekend on all the different therapies and how to build protocols on all those. But for me, when I look at my clinic, I want to know what are the best ways I can help this with my patients. And so I'm going to talk just for a couple slides on how ozone pairs really well with hyperbaric oxygen therapy in regards to defeating biofilm, because this biofilm's nasty stuff. And if we can find successful ways to stack those things, then our patients are going to get better. And that's what we're here for, is we're here for the individual in front of us. So how does HBOT and ozone work together synergistically to help with biofilm? So for those that aren't familiar, hyperbaric oxygen therapy involves breathing in higher concentrations of oxygen at minimally increased atmospheric pressure. And so the first way that these work together is this increased oxygen tension. So we're able to help increase the aerobic environment that exists and decrease these anaerobic bacterias and other things that grow. So these biofilms thrive in low oxygen environments. So if we can increase the oxygenation, then we're going to make them weaker. If we can make it harder for them to grow and survive, then it's easier for us to disrupt the protective EPS matrix that's adhesing the bacteria to the surface and causing that biofilm. So it works with ozone with these ROSs, these reactive oxygen species. And so really they both help produce ROSs, but if you really dive into the mechanisms, ozone produces ROSs and hyperbaric oxygen therapy actually increases or enhances their effectiveness. And so when we get these reactive oxygen species, and they're cranking and they're being effective and they're doing their job, we are destroying and breaking down these biofilm force fields that are out there. And then this enhancing or this modulating of immune function. So we know that both ozone and hyperbarics improve this macrophage and neutrophil activation. But really, again, we got to get the barrier off. We got to then fight and kill what's inside. And then we have to strengthen the body's natural immune response so it can go in and do its job. And stacked together, ozone and hyperbarics do this so amazingly together. So in kind of a review of how these combine, so ozone directly oxidizes and destroys biofilms, while HBOT increases oxygen levels, making them unstable. So it's almost like HBOT starts to make them unstable, and then ozone can come in and destroy them. This inhibition of quorum sensing from ozone therapy, and then HBOT helps to stimulate the immune cells to go in and fight and kill. We mentioned the ROSs of ozone generating the reactive oxygen species, while HBOT enhances their production and effectiveness to break down the biofilm. And then both of them have this improving of microcirculation and detoxification, so we can accelerate healing, create an oxygen-rich environment, which pathogens don't like to live in. And then we can help with tissue oxygenation and healing. we just talked about this, but another conclusion or kind of overview of this stacked approach. And this is what I want you to think of other things you might have access to if you're a clinician. What do you have in your office that helps to do these steps? What do you have at your disposal there? And again, we could talk about hundreds of supplements or other things and even other therapies that help do this. But when we find these stacks, that's how we can truly accelerate healing and help break patients through barriers of especially chronic illness that some people have been going through for decades. And so when we can build and stack with amazing therapies such as ozone therapy and amazing therapies such as hyperbarics together, we can truly create change for our patients. So how do you test for biofilm? So this is something that's been going on for a while, figuring out we've got to know, right? And again, I feel like I mentioned, I want to be diagnostic. If I'm giving a patient a therapy or even using something for myself, I want to know, do I even need this? What is it for? What's the benefit? And can it help? But if we don't know how to identify and or diagnose and whether or not biofilm is adding to the root cause issue or complicating it, then we don't know what to do. And we're really just throwing stuff at a wall and hoping that it sticks. So as good as ozone is, as good as hyperbarics is, as good as other treatments might be, if we don't know how to identify where they are and what they're doing and how to apply those therapies best in a diagnostic treatment driven way, then we're going to have some issues because we're just guessing. And if we're not assessing, we're guessing. So on this slide, here are some very conventional and good tests that exist out there right now as far as identifying biofilms and with which things they're good for. You can see PCR testing. There's lots of different ways out there that are doing this. This is really good with gut-related issues, and some of them do a good job with Lyme issues. There's some dysbiosis and oat testing. This looks at metabolic markers for biofilm forming pathogens. So a lot of times we'll see this applied with chronic infections and or chronic fatigue issues. Different things that we're doing in dental through microscopy and staining. And then antibiotic sensitivity testing. This is something that should be done a little bit more. And this is kind of in the world of prescription genomics. There's a bunch of different terms out there where it's saying like, hey, can your body even respond to these? But really understanding that if we're dealing with a biofilm issue, are antibiotics even appropriate at that time? I want to talk about two others one that I use every day and one that I am starting to use and excited to see what it can do for us. So as I mentioned, I work very heavily in SIRS, both in my clinic in Utah, nationwide through telehealth and telemedicine. And we test for MARCONs on everybody because, as I mentioned, about 80% of SIRS patients will have MARCONs. And the way I describe MARCONs is it's like a sprinkler drip system of inflammation that lives high up in our nasal cavity and sinuses that just sprinkler drips inflammation systemically and into our brain through the cribriform plate, driving neurological and neuroinflammation, driving systemic inflammation. So what does MARCON stand for? It stands for multiple antibiotic resistant coagulase negative staphylococci. Big term, basically a form of staph that is antibiotic resistant. And so this company, Microbiology DX, and I'll show a sample of a report here, will test to see if MARCON's present, and then it'll test to see if biofilm is present, and it'll rate it on strength so that we know if someone has a higher level of biofilm. This is what I mean as far as treatments, right? Can't just go treat MARCONs if there's a strong biofilm. We also have to do things to help eliminate the biofilm. And as a clinician, this is where I'm bringing in ozone. I'm bringing in HBOT. So this is a deep nasal swab. And this is a sample test or sample report. This is actually a real patient report, but I've taken their information off of it. So this one will come back and say that we are staph coag negative. large amount Marcons positive. So this is a Marcons positive test, but this is the part that we're talking about that is cool. Is so then they do a biofilm analysis on the sample that you sent in, and they will rate it as strong, moderate, or weak is the level of biofilm production by the organism. This particular sample had a strong 3+, so a very, very strong biofilm. So again, clinically, what does this mean? It means, well, I know what I got to use to treat Marcons, but probably before that, I've got to take this force field away. So now you can start to see how testing or assessing, not guessing, gives us clinical tools and clinical infrastructure so that we can know how to help our patients. And so this is where using ozone in a variety of different ways can help to break down this biofilm first, so that then we can have success in treating the Marcons, which lives underneath the biofilm. Another test that I actually just sent my sample in, and I'm onboarding with this company clinically as a clinician so that we can use it with our patients. The company is called Theriome. But they have a very comprehensive gut microbiome analysis. And so this is a stool sample. And they now have just being released. I think I just barely hit the cutoff. So they have a new biofilm report that's going to come through. If you have not seen this company, I'm really excited to see my own report so I can start using this and understanding how to use this with patients. It's one of the most comprehensive, better than anything else on the market that I have seen. I don't get anything from them. I'm just using them. And really, we're all about patients. We're all about patient care. And if I can find a test like these that I'm showing you guys of how to identify if biofilm is present and then what it is doing to us, I'm very excited about what this is. We'll send this out with the links so you can see a test, a report sample, as well as if you want to try this out on your own. But the biofilm report is going to be extremely interesting to show not only is it there, but how to quantify and qualify what's going on from a biofilm perspective in relation to our gut microbiome. So clinical applications, and kind of starting to bring this full circle here, but as far as where do biofilm, when we're talking with patients, really, like, one of the things I think of is that somebody's, at first, if somebody comes in and say they have been dealing with blank health issues for years, I'm thinking there's biofilm has to be there somewhere. So that kind of goes on my diagnostic chart over here as like, okay, I'm going to put that right here, and we're going to pause and listen as everything else comes in. But then really our chronic infections, like we talked about, Lyme, MRSA, Candida, we know biofilm can exist in these, and we have to know how to assess for it so that we know how to treat for it specifically. Gastrointestinal issues. So when we're dealing with these H. pylori, SIBOs, again, we have to know how to test for it. This is where I'm really excited to see what Theriome can do for us to help identify so that we stop guessing in our treatment and our care. Chronic wounds, and then these neurological and immune disorders such as SIRS, Alzheimer's, concussion, etc. We have to know how to identify, and the Marcons test is fantastic for these. Some of the oral or dental tests for these are also amazing. We have to know how to look for and how to identify these things. So key takeaways from today: biofilms play a huge major role in chronic infections. They're sometimes the silent bad guy. And, you know, if you're in this world for a while, you hear this term for a long time. I know I've heard it for years and years and years, and it wasn't until a while ago I was like, hey, I hear this term biofilm. I see supplements that talk about killing biofilm. You know, I know this exists, but we really have to understand what it is, how it works, and why it's disease causing or disease complicating, so that we know how to treat it. Ozone is extremely powerful. I would call it probably one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal, in your stack, for breaking down the biofilms and then helping to treat what's underneath it. So it's almost like the full military force. It's going to go break down the shield and then bring the troops in and enhance the troops' effectiveness afterwards to fight and kill what's going on in there. And then this diagnosis-directed combination therapy. You'll hear me say it's like a broken record over and over and over again. I truly, truly feel that if we are not assessing, we are guessing. And even if I know, oh, someone has Lyme, they might have biofilm. Okay, I'm probably not wrong, but if I can truly assess what's happening, where it is, and what damage it's causing, then I can know how to dose and build treatments that are specific to the patient instead of cookie cutter expensive treatments that might not get that person better because I didn't assess appropriately and use diagnosis directed combination therapy. So here's some references from today. Again, we'll send this out. Thank you very much. This is how you can get in contact with me. I know we've got Joey on that's working with questions, and we've got a few minutes here that we can do some Q&A, and then we can go from there. So I'll start here. There's a couple of questions. So when using ozone and or HBOT and breaking down biofilms, would binders be suggested? The short answer here is it depends. And that's my clinical answer that people get frustrated with, but the answer is it depends. Let's see, somebody wanted me to put a slide back up. It does depend as far as, now I gotta find it, guys. There you go. As far as using binders, it depends on what's going on with the patient. It depends on what's going on with their illness. It depends on what they need to be successful. So again, if I'm treating a patient with SIRS, I'm probably using a binder. If I'm looking at other things, it just depends on what they're doing. So, okay. Looking through some of our questions here. They're coming in. Okay, I'm gonna pop out of this. You'll get a recording of it. So how does ozone spare microbiome balance? We could talk about that in another webinar. I can tell you that doing some of these tests after you've done rectal insufflation, we'll see some of the healthiest microbiomes that exist out there. And so we know that it works, and that's a whole nother webinar. And then we can go from there. Yes, this will be recorded and sent out to you. And so you guys will have access to that. If you have questions about what products or things that people are asking, what ozone equipment do we recommend, what hyperbaric chambers do we recommend, you can email me through that link. I'm big fans of Simply 03 ozone equipment. I've used several different equipments over the years, and theirs are extremely reliable, as well as for chambers. US Hyperbarics is a company that we use. We have 5 of those chambers in my clinic. And so that's what that means. Somebody asked what SIRS is again. So SIRS stands for chronic inflammatory response syndrome. This is truly what mold or biotoxin illness is. If you want more information on that, hit me up, because again, we could teach a full week seminar on those types of things. There's some questions, a lot of questions coming up here about protocols, dilution ratios, dosing. We won't give those out on this webinar. But if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out. Do we offer hands-on training? Yes, that's something. Hit us up through my email, and we can talk about other training and certifications for these as well. Great. Okay. Last question or two, and then we'll talk about what's coming next week. So somebody asked, is there, a central source to educate oneself about these things that we're talking about, or certifications? The short answer is yes. And I've got some resources for those. Reach out to me at Dr. Meyers at movementclinicutah.com, and we can talk about some of those that are coming up. Next week, it should be next week, you'll get the emails and the communication about this. But we will be doing another presentation next week as far as ozone on mitochondrial dysfunction. And we're going to be doing these periodically. And so stay tuned to the emails, log in and check in. It was great to have all of you guys on today. Look forward to seeing you on our next one. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody, and have a healthy and happy weekend.